There's a strange kind of silence that comes after something you wish hadn't happened. It's not the kind of silence you get when the power's out or when you're home alone and everything's just still. No, this kind of silence has weight to it. Like the air itself is holding its breath, waiting for something to break. That's exactly what I felt. Sitting there on the floor of that cramped train compartment, knees pulled up close, hands gripping my arms like I could hold myself together if I just squeezed tight enough. The floor was hard and cold even through my clothes. The hum of the train under me kept going, steady as ever, like it didn't care what just happened, like nothing had changed. But inside? Inside everything had shifted, like the ground had given way and I was hanging on by a thread. The lights outside, street lamps, maybe station signs, I don't even know, kept flashing through the window, one after the other, lighting up the compartment in short, sharp bursts. It made everything feel even more unreal, like a movie scene I couldn't turn off. And across from me, David was sitting on the edge of the seat, breathing heavy, head down, hands fumbling with his belt like it had turned into some impossible puzzle. I didn't look at him. Not really. I couldn't. My eyes stayed fixed on the floor, on that one scuff mark by the door. Like if I stared at it long enough, I could forget how I ended up here. Then it came. Two knocks. Sharp, clear, someone at the door. I swear I stopped breathing. Just like that. My whole body tensed up, like I'd been caught. Like whoever was out there could see right through the walls. David froze too, hands pausing, eyes darting toward the sound. But neither of us moved. Not a word. Not a breath. Just silence, pressing down so hard I thought I might crack. My heart was pounding so loud, I was sure whoever knocked could hear it. Could probably feel it too. The way it echoed through the floor, through the walls, through me. We waited. 5 seconds? 10? It felt like forever, but the knocks didn't come again. Whoever it was. They left, or maybe they were still there. Listening. Watching. I didn't know. I didn't want to know. I pulled my arms tighter around myself, feeling the cold finally seep into my bones. Into that place where fear lives, deep and quiet. I didn't even notice I was shaking until I tried to steady my breath and my shoulders wouldn't stop moving. That's when I heard myself. Barely a whisper, just 3 words that slipped out before I could stop them. This was wrong. David didn't answer, didn't say a thing. He just sat there, elbows on his knees, looking at me, or maybe through me. I don't know. His face was blank, like he didn't have any words either. Maybe he was waiting for me to say something else, something that would make sense of what just happened. But there was nothing left. Nothing that would make any of it better. I closed my eyes just for a second, and all I could see was the station this morning. The sun was already too high, beating down on the platform like it had something to prove. People were rushing everywhere, pulling suitcases, saying rushed goodbyes, trying to find the right car. Mark was standing next to me, phone in one hand, coffee in the other, already distracted, already halfway gone. "They need me in Houston," he said, leaning in to kiss my forehead. Like that made it better. Like it explained why I'd be riding back with his father instead of him. "You'll be fine. Dad'll get you home." Fine. I nodded, because what else was I supposed to do? Tell him I didn't want to go? Tell him something didn't feel right? I didn't. I just smiled, told him I'd see him in a few days, and watched him walk away, already on the phone again, already gone. Now, sitting here, knees against my chest, that moment felt like it belonged to someone else, like it had happened in another life, one where things were simple and people did what they said they would. The train rocked gently, side to side, like it was trying to lull me into forgetting, into letting go. But I couldn't. The air in the compartment was thick, hard to breathe, even though it was cold enough to make my skin sting. I rubbed my hands up and down my arms, trying to warm up, trying to feel something that wasn't regret. David shifted in his seat, but didn't say anything. I glanced at him, just once, quick, and caught the way he was looking at the floor now, too. Like maybe if we both looked away, none of it would be real. But it was. And no matter how hard I wished it, No matter how many times I told myself it was a mistake, it wouldn't change a thing. I don't know how long we sat there like that. Could have been 5 minutes, could have been 50. Time does weird things when you're trying to hold yourself together, when you're trying not to feel the weight of what's just happened. Every sound felt too loud. The wheels clacking under us, the faint whistle from somewhere far ahead, even the soft rustle of David shifting on the seat across from me. It all pressed in, filled the space that used to be normal, used to be just a train ride. I let my head fall back against the wall, the cold from it biting into my neck. Maybe I needed that. Something sharp, something real, something to pull me out of this mess in my head. My eyes were open, but I wasn't seeing anything. Just those flashes of light from outside, cutting across the compartment, painting David's face 1 second, then mine, then gone. Like the world was reminding us it was still moving, still going forward whether we wanted to or not. You know, it's funny. Just that morning, everything felt ordinary. Too ordinary. Really, breakfast was the same as it always was. Mark rushing around, tying his tie, checking his phone every 5 seconds like the world might end if he didn't respond to every email right then and there. Me? I was by the sink, rinsing out my coffee cup, wondering why we always felt like strangers in the mornings, like roommates more than anything else. Married people aren't supposed to feel like that, right? Or maybe they are. Maybe that's just how it goes after a while. Hey, listen, Mark said, not even looking up. I've got to leave early. Dad'll drive you back. Shouldn't be more than a few hours. Okay, I said, because what else do you say to that? Now here I was, wishing I'd said something else, anything else. Wishing I'd asked him to stay, to push his meeting, to care enough to see that maybe, just maybe, I needed him to notice me. Not just as someone to hand off to his father, but as his wife. As a person, I blinked, pulling myself back to now. Back to the cold floor and the tightness in my chest that wouldn't let up. My hands rubbed at my arms again, more out of habit than anything. But the chill was still there. Deep. I looked at David. Finally. Really looked. And something about the way he sat there, like nothing could touch him, made my stomach twist. You should go, I said. Voice low but steady enough. Go back to your seat. He didn't move at first, just looked at me, like he was trying to figure out if I meant it, if I was really pushing him away, or if this was just another part of the silence we'd wrapped ourselves in. But after a moment, he nodded, stood up slow, and stepped past me. I didn't follow him with my eyes. I just listened. To the sound of his steps, the door clicking shut behind him, and then, finally quiet, I stayed there, on the floor, even though my legs were numb, even though my back ached from leaning against the hard wall. It felt like punishment, maybe. Like I didn't deserve the comfort of a seat, not after everything. My mind kept running, over and over like a broken record. How did it come to this? How did something that seemed so simple, just a ride home, turn into this? I closed my eyes again, hoping for sleep, for escape, for something. But all I saw was that moment at the station, the last time I saw Mark, his hand on my shoulder, his kiss on my forehead, like he was patting me on the head, like I was a kid being sent off to camp, not his wife of 8 years. And maybe that's part of why this all happened. Not an excuse, never that. But a reason. A crack that had been there for a long time, just waiting for something to push it wider. The train jerked a little, hitting a curve, pulling me back to the present. I pushed myself up, slow, my legs stiff, my hands bracing against the seat for balance. The compartment felt different now. Smaller, like the walls had crept in a little closer while I wasn't looking. I sat down, finally back in my seat, pulling my knees up, hugging them like I used to when I was a kid and the world felt too big. I rested my chin on them, staring out the window, watching the trees blur past. There was nothing else to do, nowhere else to go. Just this ride, this long, cold ride to a home I wasn't sure I wanted to return to anymore. And as the miles rolled by, I kept thinking. Not about David, not about Mark, not even about what I'd say if someone found out, but about that moment, the one right before everything falls apart. When you can still stop, still turn back, still make it right. And how easy it is to miss it. I've always thought that the way a day begins says a lot about how it's gonna end. You know those mornings when everything feels a little too rushed? A little too loud? Like the whole world is in some kind of hurry and you're just trying to catch up? That's how this day started, with the clatter of plates, the hum of the fridge, and Mark's voice cutting through the kitchen like a knife. Emma, they need me in Dallas today. I gotta catch the first flight, he said, not even looking up from his phone, one hand already loosening his tie like he couldn't get out the door fast enough. His coffee sat untouched on the counter, already cold, just like the mood hanging over us. I stood there, holding the spatula, egg still sizzling in the pan, and I didn't say anything for a second. Just nodded, like I always did. Like it was normal. Like this was just another Tuesday. All right, I finally said, keeping my voice light, like it didn't matter. What about the train? You were gonna ride back with me. He glanced up just for a second, like he'd forgotten I was even part of this trip. Dad'll go with you. It's fine, Em. He's got time. I already talked to him. And then he was gone, just like that, dropping a kiss on my cheek as he passed. The kind you give out of habit, not because you mean it. Be good, okay? I stood there for a moment after the door shut, staring at the spot where he'd been, eggs still cooking, the smell of them turning too strong. I flipped them off the heat, dumped them onto a plate, and sat down at the table, picking at them with a fork. I wasn't hungry. I wasn't anything, really. Just there, going through the motions. It wasn't the first time Mark had bailed on plans. Work always came first. I used to get upset about it, used to fight for a little more of his time, but somewhere along the line I stopped. Not because I didn't care, but because it felt like he didn't, and you can only push so hard before you wear yourself out. By the time we got to the station, the heat was already thick, clinging to everything like a second skin. The kind of heat that makes you question every layer of clothing you put on that morning. The platform was packed. Families, tourists, business folks all rushing, dragging bags, waving tickets. It was loud, alive, but I felt outside of it, like I wasn't really there, just floating through it. David was waiting near the edge of the platform, hands in his pockets, his gaze fixed on some spot far off, like he was searching for something out in the distance. He didn't wave, didn't smile, just stood there, solid and still, like always. I walked up, pulling my suitcase behind me, the wheels catching on every crack in the pavement. Morning, I said, trying to sound normal, trying to push down the weird tightness in my chest. He nodded, barely looking at me. Train's on time. That was it. No small talk. No asking how I slept. Or if I was all right. Just facts. That's how David was. Always straight to the point. Always a little too quiet. We waited in silence, the sun beating down, making the air shimmer. I could feel the sweat starting to gather at the base of my neck, sliding down between my shoulder blades, and I shifted, trying to find a bit of shade. But there wasn't any. Just that wide, open sky pressing down. When the train finally arrived, the screech of it pulling in felt like relief, even though I knew it wouldn't last. We boarded without a word, found our seats in the middle of the car, facing each other like some kind of test. I hated those seats. Too close, nowhere to look but at the person across from you. And right then, I wasn't in the mood to look at David. I slid into my spot, tossing my bag up into the rack. And he did the same, settling in with the kind of ease that comes from being used to waiting, used to long stretches of time with nothing but your own thoughts for company. The window beside me was open just a crack, enough to let in the sound of the wheels starting up again. The air not cool, but moving at least. I pulled out my phone, not to check anything really, just to have something in my hands. Something to stare at besides the man across from me? David pulled his out too, scrolling slow like he wasn't reading, just killing time. I could feel his eyes flick to me now and then, not long, just little glances, like he was checking to see if I'd say something. I didn't. It's funny, isn't it? How two people can sit so close and feel so far apart? The train rocked gently, the rhythm of it settling into my bones. And for a while, we just sat there, pretending like this was normal. like we were just two people sharing a ride. But I could feel something under the surface, something in the way the air felt thicker, heavier, like there were words waiting to be said. But neither of us wanted to be the one to let them out. By the time the train rolled into the late afternoon hours and the sun started dipping behind the trees in that way that makes everything outside the window glow, but somehow makes the inside of the train feel smaller and more closed off than ever, I found myself following David to the dining car, not because I wanted to, but because it felt like the thing to do, like something normal in a day that had already gone too quiet. The dining car wasn't full, just a few scattered folks minding their own plates and their own business, and we took a table by the window, which didn't help the heat much but gave us something to look at besides each other. And when the waiter came around, David didn't even ask what I wanted, just told him 2 coffees and whatever was easiest from the menu. And I didn't argue because it didn't seem worth it. We sat in silence for a while, the kind that isn't heavy yet but feels like it could be if someone made the wrong move or said the wrong thing. And I just watched the trees blur past while the sound of the tracks hummed beneath my feet and tried to pretend I wasn't thinking about the morning or Mark or any of the things I didn't want to admit were bothering me more than they should have. Then out of nowhere, David looked up, not sharply, but just enough to let me know he was going to say something. And he stirred sugar into his coffee slowly, like he was buying himself time, and said, "He's never been like me." And I didn't have to ask who he meant because there was only one person he ever talked about like that. I didn't answer right away, just kept watching him over the rim of my cup, waiting to see if he'd say more. And he did. His eyes drifting back to the window like he wasn't really talking to me but to himself, saying, "Mark's softer. Always has been. More his mother's boy than mine." And the way he said it wasn't cruel, but it wasn't kind either, just flat. Like he'd decided that long ago and never bothered to change his mind. I thought about what to say, about how many times Mark had told me he felt like he didn't measure up, like he was always running after something he could never quite catch. And part of me wanted to tell David that, wanted to defend him. But the words didn't feel right in my mouth. Not with the way David sat there, so sure of what he thought he knew. So I just nodded, more to fill the space than to agree, and said, "He tries hard," because I didn't know what else to give. And David gave a half shrug that said he didn't think much of trying. And then we were quiet again, just the clatter of plates and the low murmur of voices around us. And it felt like something had shifted, just slightly, like the ground under us wasn't quite steady anymore. We finished the meal without much else, the food as forgettable as the rest of the day. And when we walked back to the compartment, the hallways seemed narrower than before, like the walls had inched closer while we were gone. And by the time we settled in for the night, the air was thicker, not just with heat, but with the weight of everything left unsaid. The windows still wouldn't open no matter how much I tried, and the little fan in the corner did nothing but push warm air around, and I lay on the top bunk staring at the ceiling, counting the flickers of light from outside as they swept across the walls in time with the train's steady rhythm, and I could hear David below me, shifting occasionally, breathing slow and even like none of it touched him. But for me, there was no sleep coming, just thoughts looping over themselves. Thoughts about Mark and about David and about how I ended up here in the middle of nowhere with too much time to think and not enough air to breathe. I turned over. Then again, the sheet tangled around my legs, my skin damp and sticky, and my head too full of things I didn't want to carry. And I knew without looking that David was awake too, that he could feel it same as I could. This strange pull in the dark that made the space between us feel smaller even when no one moved. I sat up for a while, my back against the wall, knees pulled close, just listening to the train and trying to find something steady in the noise. And though I knew morning would come like it always does, I also knew it wouldn't bring much relief. Just another day of pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. Not really. Not for a long time now. There's something about being awake when the world around you is asleep that makes everything feel different. Like the silence presses in deeper and the air gets thicker and every little sound feels bigger somehow. And that's exactly how it was that night on the train when I found myself staring at the same ceiling I'd been staring at for what felt like hours, knowing full well I wasn't going to sleep no matter how much I wished I could. Because no matter which way I turned or how tightly I pulled the blanket around me, the heat stuck to my skin, and the noise of the wheels kept my mind from settling, and the thoughts I'd been trying to push down all day just kept rising back up like they had nowhere else to go. I sat up slowly, the air feeling heavier as I swung my legs over the side of the bunk and just sat there for a minute, with my feet barely touching the floor and my hands gripping the edge of the mattress like I needed something to hold on to. And I told myself I was just going to get some water. Just something simple to do with my body, because if I stayed in that small space a minute longer, I was going to crawl out of my skin. The hallway outside the compartment was dim, like most of the train had already gone quiet, and I moved slowly, not really thinking, just following the path I'd taken before toward the little water dispenser at the end of the car, because it was familiar and it gave me something to focus on. But when I turned the corner expecting the usual stillness, I wasn't alone. And for a second, I froze. Not because I was afraid, but because something about seeing him there in that moment felt like it changed everything. David was sitting by the window in the same spot he always seemed to find like it belonged to him. One leg stretched out and the other bent up like he wasn't in any rush to go anywhere. And the light from outside cut across his face in pieces, making it hard to read what he was thinking. But he didn't look surprised to see me. In fact, he just raised his glass slightly, like he was saying something without words. And I nodded without meaning to, because I didn't know what else to do except keep moving. I filled a cup slowly, letting the water run longer than it needed to, because the sound was something to hold on to. And I could feel the weight of his eyes even if I wasn't looking straight at him, and when I finally turned just a little, just enough to see if he was still watching, he spoke. Not loudly, but clearly. "You know he doesn't see you." The words landed in the space between us like they'd been waiting there for a while, and I felt my heart beat faster. Not because I didn't understand, but because I did, and I didn't want to admit it to him or to myself. And for a moment, I just stood there with the cup in my hand, trying to decide if I should pretend I didn't hear, or if I should just walk away. I asked what, even though I knew exactly what he meant and he didn't hesitate, didn't give me a chance to stop him. "Mark?" he said, like I needed reminding. "He doesn't look at you the way you should be looked at." And I didn't know how to answer that, because I'd been trying not to think about it for months, trying not to feel that distance growing, trying not to notice the way Mark barely glanced up from his phone anymore when I walked into the room, and I hated that David saw it, hated that I couldn't hide it from him or from myself. The silence stretched between us, and I could feel it in my chest like a weight, like something pulling at me. And I tried to take a breath, but it didn't come easy because part of me wanted to scream and part of me just wanted to disappear. And I didn't even realize he'd stood up until he was already close, already closing that small space that didn't feel small anymore. He didn't touch me, not at first, just reached out slowly and took the cup from my hand, setting it down gently like it didn't matter anymore. And I stood there frozen with my hands empty and my heart pounding louder than I could stand. And when I finally looked up at him, his eyes didn't move, didn't flinch. And I couldn't breathe because the air between us felt like it was about to break. And then he leaned in, not fast, not harsh, just close enough for me to feel the warmth of him. Close enough for the world to go quiet except for the sound of my own pulse in my ears. And his lips touched mine softly, just for a second. Just enough to feel real. Just enough to remind me that this was happening, and I didn't move, didn't pull away, didn't stop it. But then I did. I stepped back quickly, the space between us snapping like a stretched thread, and I turned without a word, walking down the hallway with my heart racing so fast I couldn't think, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but lean against the wall and try to understand what I'd just let happen and why I didn't stop it sooner. I don't know how long I stood there in that hallway, staring at nothing, the cool metal of the wall pressing into my back like it could somehow ground me, like it could pull me back to myself. But it didn't. It just made me more aware of how fast my heart was beating and how shaky my hands had gotten, and how hard it was to make sense of the fact that a man I barely knew, a man I shouldn't have let get that close, had just kissed me and I didn't stop him soon enough. The train kept moving, steady and loud, the same rhythm it had always had. But something about it felt different now, like it wasn't just taking me somewhere on a map, but somewhere I wasn't sure I wanted to go, somewhere I didn't recognize anymore. And as much as I wanted to tell myself it didn't mean anything, that it was just a moment, just a mistake, I couldn't stop the way my skin still burned where he'd touched me, or the way my breath still caught every time I thought about the look in his eyes right before it happened. I stayed out there longer than I needed to, just standing still, letting the cold from the window seep into me, trying to push out the heat that had built up inside, trying to think about Mark, about home, about anything other than the silence that had wrapped around me and David in that little space where the lines got blurry and I didn't know who I was for a minute. Eventually, I knew I had to go back, not because I wanted to, but because there wasn't anywhere else to go and pretending I could stay out there forever wasn't going to change anything. So I took a deep breath, straightened up, and walked back down the hall, my feet moving slow like I was trying to buy time I didn't have, my mind racing with questions I didn't want to answer. When I opened the door to the compartment, the lights were low, the air still heavy, and he was already lying down on his bunk, his back turned to me like he'd been asleep for hours, like none of it had happened. And for a second, I just stood there watching, waiting for him to say something, to move, to look at me, but he didn't. And I wasn't sure if I was relieved or disappointed. I climbed back up to my bunk, my hands gripping the sides tight like I was afraid I might fall, and I lay down facing the wall, pulling the blanket over me even though it did nothing to push back the heat, even though my skin still felt too tight, too awake, too full of something I couldn't name. The noise of the train was the only thing I could hear, the steady clatter of wheels on tracks, the occasional groan of the car as it shifted, and underneath all of that, the sound of his breathing, slow and even, like nothing was different, like we were just two strangers sharing a space on a long ride home. I closed my eyes, but sleep didn't come, not even close. And the harder I tried to push everything away, the clearer it all became. The way he'd looked at me, the way I hadn't stopped him, the way I didn't know what any of it meant, but I knew it had changed something inside me, something I wasn't ready to face. Morning didn't come with sunlight or warmth, just a dull gray glow that filtered through the window like the day wasn't sure it wanted to start either. And when I finally sat up, my body aching from the stiffness of not moving, not resting, I glanced down and he was already up, already dressed, already moving like nothing had happened, and I hated how easy it seemed for him, how normal. We didn't talk, didn't even look at each other as we packed up our things, as we got ready for whatever came next. Just moved through the motions like strangers, like we'd never shared anything, like the night before didn't exist. And maybe that was easier. Maybe that was the only way to make it through the rest of the trip without falling apart completely. But as I sat there, watching the landscape blur past the window, fields and towns and places I didn't recognize, I felt it again, that pull, that weight in my chest that wouldn't let go. And I knew that no matter how much I tried to pretend, no matter how quiet we stayed, nothing was going to be the same when this train finally stopped. The morning light didn't bring peace like it should have, didn't lift the weight that had settled over me, didn't make anything feel fresh or new. It just poured in through the narrow window like an unwelcome guest, casting long, pale streaks across the seat cushions and the floor where my bag rested, half-zipped like I hadn't been sure whether to finish packing or to just leave it all as it was, untouched and waiting for someone else to decide what happened next. The train rocked the same as it always had, steady, familiar, but there was something different in the air now, something tight and uncomfortable, something I couldn't put a name to but felt deep in my chest, like a knot that kept pulling tighter no matter how much I tried to breathe through it. I didn't say anything when I climbed down from the bunk, didn't look at him either, just went about the small morning routine that felt more like a performance than anything real. Folding the blanket, brushing my hand over my shirt like it would somehow smooth out the thoughts running wild in my head, checking my phone even though I knew there was nothing new. No messages, no updates, no sign that the world outside this train cared about what was happening in here. He sat there like he always did, calm, quiet, the newspaper in his lap like he was waiting for breakfast in some small-town diner, not like he was sitting across from a woman who hadn't slept a wink and couldn't stop thinking about the space between them that seemed to shrink and grow with every breath. He held out a paper cup, coffee, the kind you get from the tiny cart they roll down the aisle that never tastes quite right, and his hand lingered a second longer than it needed to, his eyes meeting mine with that same steady calm that made my stomach twist in a way I didn't understand. "Figured you could use something warm," he said, and the way he said it, like we were just two people making small talk on a long trip, made it worse somehow because nothing about it felt warm. I took the cup, nodded, managed a small thank you that didn't feel like mine, and sat back down. The heat from the coffee doing nothing to settle the cold that had wrapped itself around my shoulders the moment the sun came up. The silence was thick, not just because we weren't speaking, but because of all the things that had already been said without words. The looks, the pauses, the moments where time seemed to stretch too far, and I couldn't sit there any longer. Couldn't bear the weight of his gaze or the sound of the train or the way my hands kept trembling no matter how tight I held the cup. I stood up, moved to the hallway without thinking, without caring if it looked strange, just needing space, needing air, needing something that didn't feel like it was pressing in on all sides. The window was cool under my palm, and I leaned into it, watching the trees blur past one after another. Like maybe if I focused hard enough on the outside, the inside would quiet down. Why didn't I stop it? I thought, the words loud in my head. Too loud, drowning out everything else. Why didn't I feel the way I was supposed to feel? There should have been disgust. Should have been anger, should have been something sharp and clear, but all I felt was this heavy, sick twist of anxiety that wouldn't leave me alone. That wouldn't let me breathe easy no matter how many times I tried to tell myself it was over. That it didn't mean anything. That it could just disappear like a bad dream if I ignored it long enough. Lunchtime came quicker than I expected. Not because I was hungry or even thinking about food, but because time seemed to skip and drag all at once. Like the minutes stretched long when I was alone in the hallway, but suddenly rushed forward the second I sat back down in that compartment again, trying to pretend everything was normal when every part of me screamed that it wasn't. He didn't say much, just pulled out the little tray the way you're supposed to and unwrapped one of those sandwiches they hand out, dry and too cold. But I watched him eat like it was just another day. Like nothing had shifted. Like we were strangers again who didn't know better. I wasn't going to touch anything. Didn't trust myself to eat. Not when my stomach was already a mess of nerves. But he reached across the table. Slow, deliberate. Holding out the sugar for my tea. Something I didn't even ask for. Something I didn't really want. And when our hands brushed, just that little touch, everything tensed up again. I felt it. The heat. The awareness. The rush of thoughts I didn't want. And for a second, I just sat there, my hand under his, not moving, not pulling away. Because part of me froze. Didn't know what to do. Didn't want to believe that even this small thing could feel like too much. I pulled back. Not fast. Not sharp. Just enough to break the contact and look down at my lap, pretending I hadn't noticed. Pretending I was still in control of this thing that had started to slip through my fingers the moment I let that kiss happen. The rest of the meal passed like it always did, with the sound of silverware and the low hum of conversation from the next compartment over. People laughing about something I couldn't hear. Something simple and light that felt miles away from where I was sitting. From what was happening inside me. From the weight that seemed to grow heavier every time I looked at him and saw nothing but calm. Nothing but patience. Nothing but that same unreadable face that made me wonder if I was imagining it all. If I was the only one carrying it. When dinner rolled around, I couldn't sit there anymore. Couldn't share another meal, another glance, another silence that meant too much. So I stayed in the compartment alone. Told him I wasn't hungry. Told him I was tired. Told him anything that would keep him from sitting across from me again, because I needed space. I needed distance. I needed to see myself without him in the frame. The mirror in the corner wasn't big, just enough to show my face. Just enough to catch the way my eyes didn't look like mine anymore. Didn't shine the way they used to. Didn't carry the same light they did when I kissed Mark goodbye on that platform, thinking everything would be fine. I stared at my reflection, trying to find something I recognized. Something that made sense. Something I could hold on to when everything else felt like it was spinning. But the more I looked, the more it felt like I was a stranger to myself. Like the woman in the mirror wasn't me, wasn't someone I wanted to be. Wasn't someone I could explain if Mark walked through that door right now and asked what was wrong. I closed my eyes, leaned forward, rested my forehead against the cool glass, hoping the chill would bring me back, would calm the storm inside long enough to think straight. But all I saw, even in the dark, even with my eyes shut tight, was him. His face. His eyes, the way he looked at me in that moment before everything shifted. And I couldn't breathe right. There's something about the quiet at night in a train car that doesn't feel like the peaceful kind you get at home. It's heavier, more loaded, Like the silence is waiting for something to happen. And as I sat there in that dim compartment with the door closed and locked behind me, I could feel it pressing in on my skin, in my chest, in the way my hands wouldn't stay still no matter how tightly I folded them in my lap. The moonlight was cutting across the floor in thin slants, catching on the metal edge of the seats, throwing just enough light to see, but not enough to feel safe. Not enough to distract me from the fact that I was sitting in his spot, sitting there like I had some right to be, like I belonged there. I didn't even know why I was waiting, or what exactly I thought would happen. But there I was, perched on the edge of that seat, my knees pressed together, my fingers laced so tight they ached, staring at the closed door like maybe I'd get up before it opened, like maybe I'd come to my senses. But I didn't. The minutes stretched, long and slow, each one louder than the last, because I could hear the train, the wheels, the slight creaks, the groan of metal shifting. But none of it reached me the way it should. None of it felt real. Because the only thing that felt real was the sound of my own breathing and the question I couldn't shake. What am I doing? When the handle turned, I didn't move. When the door opened, slow and careful, I stayed where I was, my eyes fixed on the floor, on the shadow that spilled in first, long and familiar. And then he stepped in, quiet as always, closing the door behind him with a soft click that felt louder than anything I'd heard all night. He didn't say a word, didn't ask why I was there, didn't ask if he should leave, didn't even pause. He just sat down beside me, not close enough to touch. Not at first, but close enough to feel it. That pull, that weight between us that had started days ago and refused to go away. We didn't speak, didn't need to, because the silence was thick enough to carry every thought we weren't saying, every question we were too afraid to ask. And as we sat there, side by side, I felt his hand shift, slow and hesitant, until his fingers brushed mine, just barely, just enough to make my breath hitch in my throat. I didn't pull away, didn't flinch, just stayed there, frozen, eyes on our hands, on the way they didn't quite touch but didn't separate either. And for a second it felt like time stopped, like the train stopped, like the world outside didn't exist. I turned my head, slow, heavy, and looked at him, really looked. And he was already watching me, his eyes softer than I expected. Not demanding, not pushing, just waiting, just present. And that was somehow worse, somehow harder to face, because it wasn't about him anymore. It was about me, about the choice I hadn't made but was still making every second I stayed in that seat. I leaned in, just enough for our shoulders to touch, just enough to feel the warmth of him, and he didn't move, didn't lean away, didn't speak. He just let me be there, let me breathe, let me sit in that moment without asking for more. And then the world outside pushed back in. I don't know how long we sat like that, still and quiet, with the train rocking just enough to remind us that time wasn't standing still no matter how much it felt like it was. The moonlight had shifted, falling differently now, cutting across the window and painting long shadows that stretched over the seats and the floor, making everything look softer but no less sharp inside my chest. I could hear him breathing beside me, steady, controlled, like he was holding something back. Or maybe I was just imagining it. Maybe that was me, holding back whatever was building in my throat, whatever was making my hands so restless I had to press them against my knees just to keep them still. I don't even remember deciding to move, but I did. Just a little, just enough to face him more fully, to meet his eyes in the dark. And in that moment, something passed between us. Something that didn't need words, didn't need permission. And before I could think about it, before I could stop myself, I leaned in closer, close enough to feel the breath between us, close enough that I could see the way his eyes flickered. Not away, but deeper, like he saw through every layer I'd tried to keep up. And then it happened. It wasn't planned, wasn't careful. It was just a moment, raw and real, when our faces were too close and the space between us just disappeared. And my lips found his, soft at first, uncertain. Like even now I wasn't sure if it was right. But I didn't pull away, not immediately. Not until the weight of it settled, and the air grew thick again. We broke apart slowly, not like something was wrong, but like neither of us knew what to do next. And as I sat back, my heart thudding in my chest so loud I could barely hear anything else, I caught a flicker of doubt in his face, just for a second before he turned his eyes away. And that's when I felt it. That strange, sudden sense that something wasn't quite right. That something was just off. It wasn't in the room. It wasn't in him. It was out there, somewhere beyond the door, beyond the walls of that train car. And I didn't know why it hit me, but it did. Sharp and cold, like a chill running up my spine even in the thick air of the compartment. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that just outside that door, in the narrow space between compartments where the shadows were deep and the corners always seemed to hold more than they should, someone else was there. Chris? I hadn't seen him in years, not since Mark's college days, when he used to come around the house, always full of jokes and stories and that easy charm that made him hard to dislike. I wouldn't have even known he was on the train if I hadn't heard Mark mention it in passing. Something about him heading to the same conference, taking the same route. But we hadn't crossed paths. Hadn't even thought about it since we left the station. But he was there now, standing in the dark, his back pressed to the wall, his phone raised just enough to catch the narrow window at the top of our door, that small rectangle of glass that felt too high to matter, too small to notice. Until it wasn't. His face was hard to see, just a shape in the shadows, but the light from his screen was clear, cold and unblinking, as he watched, as he recorded, as he caught a truth neither of us was ready to face. And inside, we sat, unaware, still caught in that silent storm of what we had just done, of what it meant or didn't mean, or couldn't mean anymore. I stood up after a while, my legs stiff, my body heavy, and walked to the window, pressing my hand against the glass like it might give me some kind of answer, some kind of escape. But all I saw was darkness rushing past, trees and lights, and nothing that could take away the weight in my chest. David stayed seated, quiet, watching me, but not saying anything. Not now. And maybe that was for the best. Maybe we'd already said enough without words. Chris slipped away as quietly as he had come, leaving nothing behind but the echo of what he'd seen and the proof he now carried with him. We didn't know. Not yet. But we would. There's something about the way a train pulls into a station that makes everything slow down in your chest first, like your heart is trying to figure out what's coming before your head catches up. And as I stood there by the window watching the platform slide into view, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that something wasn't where it was supposed to be, that someone should have been there waiting. But all I saw was emptiness, just a stretch of concrete and steel and flickering lights with no one on the benches, no familiar face stepping forward, no Mark, no one at all. I didn't move right away because I thought maybe I was just early, or maybe he was just late. And I kept telling myself that over and over as people around me stood and reached for their bags, laughing softly, stretching their legs like they didn't feel the same heaviness I did. And by the time the train fully stopped, I was still frozen in place, my hands tight around the handle of my suitcase. My breath caught somewhere in my throat like it didn't want to come out and face whatever was waiting out there. David stood too, slow and steady like always, like nothing ever touched him the way it touched me. And as he stepped past me, he didn't say a word, didn't ask if I was all right, didn't offer a hand or a look or anything at all. He just moved toward the door and I followed. Not because I was ready, but because what else was I supposed to do? Stay on the train and wait for something that wasn't coming? The air outside hit me all at once, heavy and cool and too still, like even the wind didn't know what to do here. And as I stepped onto the platform, the wheels of my suitcase thudding softly against the ground, I looked around again, scanning every corner, every shadow, hoping to see Mark's face, hoping to see him wave or smile or even just stand there with that impatient look he always had when he was waiting for me. But there was nothing, just the sound of the train behind me settling into silence. I pulled my phone from my pocket, my fingers already shaking even before I saw that there was no signal, no messages, no missed calls, just that empty little icon in the corner of the screen that felt like a door slammed shut. And I tried to tell myself it was just the station, just a dead spot, just a fluke. But something in my chest was already tightening, like it knew better. David was already moving, already calling for a cab. And when he turned to me, his voice was calm, almost too calm, like he didn't see what I saw, like he didn't feel the weight that was pressing down on me. "Let's go," he said. But I couldn't answer, couldn't move, couldn't even breathe right. I just stood there, my feet rooted to the spot, my eyes still on the place where Mark should have been, where everything should have been, and nothing was. The cab ride felt longer than it should have, even though the roads were almost empty, and the driver didn't say a word the whole way, and I sat there in the back seat staring out the window but not really seeing anything, just watching the streetlights blur into lines and trying to figure out how we got here, because none of this felt right. And none of this felt like something I could explain even to myself. David sat beside me quiet and still, his hands resting on his knees, like he had nothing to carry, nothing to regret. And I wondered if he was even thinking about what had happened, or if he had already moved past it like it didn't matter, because he had done what he wanted, and that was all there was to it. When we pulled up in front of the house, the first thing I noticed was how dark it looked. The porch light off the windows, blank and still, and for a second I thought, maybe he wasn't home yet. Maybe he was just running late. But then I saw it. My suitcase. Right there by the door, neatly placed like someone had taken their time packing it. Like someone wanted to make sure I knew exactly what this meant. And my legs felt weak as I stepped out of the car, as I walked slowly up to the door, as I reached for my keys, with the hope I didn't even believe in anymore. But the key didn't work. It didn't even turn, and when I looked through the small window beside the door, I saw more than just my suitcase. I saw all of my things stacked there, my shoes, my coat, the little box where I kept letters from years ago, everything in its place, like I didn't belong anymore, like I had never belonged at all. My phone buzzed in my hand, sharp and sudden. And when I looked down, I saw the message, just 4 words, but they hit harder than anything I had ever felt before. "Don't look for me. It's over." That was it. No explanation, no anger, no room for questions, just the end. Just a wall I couldn't climb. And when I tried to call him, the line didn't even ring. His name just vanished from my screen. Like he had never existed. Like we had never existed. And when I turned to David, hoping for something, anything, he was gone too. The cab already driving off down the street, leaving me standing there alone in the cold morning air with nothing but silence for company. I stood there for a long time. I don't know how long, just holding onto my suitcase like it was the only thing left of the life I had, and I kept looking at the door, hoping it would open. Hoping this was just some cruel mistake, but it didn't, and it wasn't. And the longer I stood there, the more I understood that I wasn't going to get another chance. I wasn't going to hear his voice again, or walk back into that house, or explain anything. Because he had already decided that I wasn't worth the effort. The street was quiet. No cars, no people, just the faint rustle of trees in the distance and the sound of my own breath, shaky and uneven. And I sat down on the step, my back against the door that wouldn't open. And I let it all sink in, because there was nowhere else to go. No one else to call. No way to undo any of it. David's number was blocked too. I don't know when he did it or why he even bothered, but it didn't matter because I didn't want to talk to him. Not now, not ever. And as the sun started to rise, turning the sky that pale gray that makes everything feel colder, I realized that this was it. This was how it ends. Not with a fight. Not with a goodbye, but with silence and an empty street and the weight of everything I'd lost pressing down so hard I could barely breathe.